This is now the 9th year of my website, and this past year I did not really update a lot, so I'm going to make up for it right now by reviewing a whole bunch of anime I watched this past year but didn't get around to talking about. First up is I Can't Understand What My Husband Is Saying, the Japanese title being the horrifically long Danna ga nani o itteru ka wakaranai ken. It's a comedy anime with very short episodes, following the daily lives of an otaku husband and a normal wife, who have nothing in common hobby-wise, but are deeply in love with each other nonetheless. I'm always skeptical of anything with otaku in it, especially if it's a comedy, but this time I was pleasantly surprised with just how well the comedy worked. Of course, many of the jokes were hit or miss, but the hit rate was relatively high, especially for anime comedies, and the jokes moved quickly enough that even though the episodes were very short, there are usually a few good jokes in every episode. It slowed down a bit towards the end, and that's why I'm giving this a single plus, but for the first few episodes I did have this in double plus territory. Oh, and one more thing, if you can find the ending theme at karaoke, I definitely recommend giving it a shot. Next is Zankyou no Terror, or Terror in Resonance. This seemed like the typical no vitamin A anime that I'd have no interest in, but a friend wrote me into marathoning this on New Year's Eve. It's about two genius teenage boys who plan a whole bunch of terrorist attacks in which nobody dies, and they challenge the police to riddles in order to stop the bombings from happening. It's a perfectly interesting and enjoyable show for what it is, but it could have been so much better. First of all, it falls into many of the usual no vitamin A traps. It's always cutesifying violence, and it's always trying to inject depth where it's totally unnecessary and only makes the show weaker as a result. Many of the riddles, for example, if they had just ditched the Sphinx symbolism, they could have had better riddles. This kind of shit really annoys me. But all things considered, it is interesting to watch. The action and animation are both good looking. The pacing is pretty strong, but you also have to consider that I did marathon it. And the show ends on a really powerful note, and by the end I mean the very end of the show. Which goes a long way to explaining why many of the reviews for this show seem excessively high. I'm giving this show a single plus, and that's really all it deserves. Next up is the first season of Fate Stay Night Unlimited Blade Works. I really like the Unlimited Blade Works movie as a supplement to the visual novel, but as a standalone work, it moved way too quickly for someone with no knowledge of the series to really get into. I figured a longer, slower, more detailed anime TV series would be a valuable addition to the franchise, but not this slow. The fights are gorgeous, but outside the fights, there is way too much dialogue, especially when they're beating you over the head with the theme of Shiro being so selfless that he's ruining his own life in the process. A lot of people complained about the excessive dialogue in Fate Zero, which I did not feel to be excessive in any way, shape, or form, but in this particular series, it really is bothering me. And because of that, I'm giving the first season a single plus, when after the first 2 or 3 episodes, it felt like it was a surefire double plus, if not triple plus. Hopefully the second season picks things up a bit. Next up is Terra Formars, an anime about fighting giant cockroaches on Mars. The big problem with this anime is that it was way too short, and it never got into that rhythm you want a shonen anime to get into. Otherwise, I liked it. What's really unique about this anime is the pervasive sense of hopelessness you feel for the main characters. Ultimately, in a shonen anime, the good guys gotta win, but the sense of hopelessness you feel despite how much they win never fades. Final grade, single plus, but I really am hoping for a second season, or if not, good chance I'll read the manga someday. Next up is Sword Art Online 2. This series had more left in the tank than I expected. In particular, the first arc of this season, the Gun Gale Online arc, was really exciting. After that, it gets a bit fillerish. The final arc finishes a bit stronger than the filler, but it still was a bit sappy. Moving forward, it once again looks like Sword Art Online doesn't have a lot left in the tank, but I could be proven wrong once again. Final grade, single plus. Next up is Psycho-Pass 2. I expect to give this its own post, so I'm not going to go into significant detail here. This is because on Twitter I claimed this was not only a double plus season, but it was better than the first season, and this was somehow controversial. The gist of my argument is that the first season really isn't as good as people seem to remember it being. Stay tuned for a further analysis. Next up is Akame ga Kill. This is one I was really hyping up beforehand, and the anime turned out to be a disappointment. It's still one of my favorite manga of all time, and the anime does benefit from at least having a very strong story to work off, but otherwise it really should have been so much better. You'll be getting a full review once the manga ends, which should hopefully be within the next year. Final grade, single plus. Next up is Aldnoah.Zero. This is another one that I plan to review separately someday, because it is really good. I'd say it's the best anime I watched over the past year, aside from Hunter x Hunter, which has been going on since 2011, so that one doesn't count. I'm not going to talk about it right now since the second season is still running, but the second season is almost over, so if there is a good time to start watching the series, it's now. Go check it out. Final grade, double plus. Next up is No Game, No Life. This is about an unbeatable brother-sister gaming team that gets sucked into another universe in which everything is determined by how good you are at games. Of all the races in this world, humans are ranked dead last, and this brother-sister duo is trying to take over the world by challenging the other races to games, the kicker being that the other races always have powers that humans don't, thus putting the humans at a seeming disadvantage. The games are often kind of clever, but they also have a lot of stupid parts too. It works though, because the series is in large part fan service and comedy. So when something stupid happens, you never feel like you can't take it seriously, because you were never supposed to take it that seriously in the first place. Ultimately, the games are far from masterfully designed, but they are interesting and fun, and if you can ride with that, you're really going to enjoy this series. Final grade, double plus, I hope a second season comes out someday. Next up is RahXephon. This is one I really wanted to like. The RahXephon manga was actually the first manga I ever purchased. This was at the Pittsburgh airport in 2003 when my flight was delayed. I tried watching the anime a year earlier, but the files were corrupted, so I had to drop it after 4 episodes. Finally, I was really hoping to come out on the RahXephon side of the RahXephon vs. Evangelion debate. This is in part because RahXephon's what I came into contact with first, and also because I find certain aspects of the fandom surrounding Evangelion to be really annoying. But being the objective, unbiased critic I am, I have to say I liked Evangelion more. To be sure, they both have their issues, and it's not like one's far and away better than the other. But I did catch myself asking myself while watching RahXephon, why can't this be just a little more like Evangelion? In particular, RahXephon was kinda fucked up, but if you're gonna be kinda fucked up, you may as well go all out like Evangelion did. But comparisons to Evangelion aside, the big problem with RahXephon for me was that it's one of those old school anime that went out of its way to make its plot really convoluted. This is something that, say, 10 years ago, I was not just receptive to, I actually really liked, but these days, I just find it to be a hassle. Because key plot points are needlessly hidden from you, it's hard to understand where the characters are coming from, and this makes the characters seem less interesting. Evangelion is guilty of the same thing to an extent, but it's not so much that it hides things you need to know, it just hides things you want to know, and you still have a good idea of where the characters are coming from. So at the end of the day, I'd say that things probably would have been different if I'd successfully been able to watch RahXephon 10 years ago, but as it stands right now, I'm just giving it a single plus. Next up is Haikyuu, the volleyball anime. The two main characters of Haikyuu, who bear an eerie resemblance to the two main characters of Zankyou no Terror, are a short guy who can jump really high and a volleyball prodigy who in the past was a really crappy teammate. Together they form the ultimate combo as they strive to bring their once proud volleyball team back into prominence. I'd say overall this is an average sports anime, and by the way, that is a good thing. It's pretty rare for me to watch a sports anime I don't like. The biggest weakness of the show is that it's a little too feel-good for my taste. But I'm willing to suck it up, especially since Haikyuu is very popular with the kids in my school. And unfortunately that's becoming a bigger and bigger criteria for what I'm watching these days. Anyway, I'm looking forward to the second season, and the first season gets a single plus. Alright, now let's move on to the best of the best, Hunter x Hunter. I watched all of the old anime, which goes up to the end of Greed Island, and I figured that was a great place to cut it off, because from what I've read in the manga, the Chimera Ant arc did not look like it was going to be good. Boy, how wrong I was. Now, I don't read a lot of manga. With that said, this is the best example, by far, I've seen of an anime outdoing the manga. It took all the great ideas that the author had but did a crappy job of expressing, and expressed them perfectly in anime form. The whole thing was gripping from start to finish. Even the election arc, particularly its climax, which I complained about in a previous post, I actually kinda like the way it came out, which is a remarkable change from my previous stance that I was offended by its very existence. I just can't say enough good things about this anime. Final grade, triple plus, go watch it. Next up is Initial D, Final Stage. As with the rest of Initial D, it's a double plus show. If I haven't convinced you to watch it by the final stage, there is nothing I can say at this point that's going to convince you any further. Just go watch it if you haven't already, it's really good. Next up is Fate Khalid Liner Prisma Ilyas Y. Good action and comedy, lame drama. If you're a fan of the Fate franchise, it may be your cup of tea, otherwise there's really no point in watching it. Final grade, single plus. Next up is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, Stardust Crusaders, Season 1. There's a good chance this one's going to get a separate review once the second season's finished, so I'm not going to go into detail here. Let's just say that while it is single plus, I do like pretty much all the changes the author made, and this is shaping up to be my favorite season so far. Last on the list is When Marnie Was There, the Japanese title being Omoide no Marnie. This was the second movie I ever watched raw in Japanese, and it was the first movie I watched in Japanese that I'd never seen before in English. Fortunately, because it's a Ghibli film that's supposed to be child-friendly, and because much of the conversation in the movie is between children, I was able to pick up most of it. Critically speaking, I would have to say the movie is well made, despite the fact that Miyazaki was not on the project. The problem is that the story is just kind of boring. Usually when you think of Ghibli films, you're thinking of a story that's really imaginative. But this story was just kinda normal. It does have its magical elements, but those elements are pretty tame compared to other Ghibli films. So ultimately, I think that Studio Ghibli got as much out of this film as it could, there just wasn't a lot to work with. Final grade, single tilde. And now for some real life updates. First of all, I am still in Japan, and I do plan on sticking around here for one more year to keep studying Japanese. I've definitely gotten a lot better over the past 8 months, but I still have a long way to go before I'm really comfortable with where I am, let alone fluent in Japanese. So that's really taken up the bulk of my time. I spend a little time studying each day, and because of that, I really don't have much time to update on a regular basis. Really don't expect anything more than maybe once or twice a month, but what else is new, right? In other news, I am still blind. Things really haven't changed much for better or for worse. I just gotta find some way to deal with it, and hopefully things will get better over time. So, just for the next year, I'm just gonna be chilling out here, updating every so often, and thanks to all those of you who do stick around and catch the updates when they do come out. Look forward to the next ones. See ya.